Okay guys, some of you may think that all I do is hate on the game constantly, and although you're kinda not wrong, I do say positive things about Destiny 2 too. Heresy so far has been great. The content we got so far in my opinion massively outperforms any other previous season and episode, at least in the recent past, but it doesn't diminish the facts that there are a lot of downsides as well. If I think something is good, I'll say it's good, but if I think it's bad, then you're gonna hear my brutal opinion of how terrible it really is. Anyway, hate aside, we're here to talk about the new Rushdown game mode that came with Guardian Games 2025, so this is sort of like a review of that game mode, and just in general, Guardian Games as a whole so far, and my first impressions on the new Rushdown mode, which I think so far is pretty mixed, but mostly positive. Let me just give you a TLDR breakdown, because nobody wants a 30-minute long video these days. So here's the good. It's fast paced that keeps you moving and engaged in combat constantly. It's a quick and fairly straightforward game mode, so it's not as long as a 50 wave onslaught that can take about an hour. It's also really enjoyable and great to experiment around with different builds. You can see the total boss damage dealt in the end screen, which I like, so you know who's carrying and who's throwing hard, but it's also not too crazy, and by that I mean they're not throwing us into a contest mode Pantheon GM-like activity that goes wild, considering it is a casual activity targeted mostly towards free-to-play players as a free event. And lastly, it's good in terms of what it has to offer. Taking basically final boss encounters of all the content like Empire hunts, Nightmare hunts, and all seasonal activities, and throwing them into a Pantheon style activity is pretty awesome, and I really like that. It kinda shows that you can reuse all the content and still make them enjoyable. Throw in some modifiers, up the difficulty, and reward us with new weapons and perks for participating in that. It doesn't really change anything about the encounters we face, at least as far as I can see, so all nostalgic elements are there too, for things that have been vaulted, which is nice, and it's just nice to play as a player who played back during those activities, when it was in the game, and having it back now with a change in difficulty, with some new modifiers in place, is pretty cool. Not only that, but it is fantastic for new and returning players too, who never actually got to experience that content before, so although it's not new content, it's essentially new to those players who never got to experience some of the vaulted content from those specific encounters back in the day. When it comes to the Rushdown activity itself, I only managed to play a few hours worth. So for the bosses for day 1, we had the Technocrat Empire hunt, and then the Gatelord boss from the Nightmare hunt as boss number 2. We got the Voice of Riven, and to be honest, I have no idea where this one is from, so if you know, just let me know down below. But for number 4, we have the Nightmare of Gaul, which I believe was from Season of the Haunted, and that was from Season 17 in 2022. And number 5, we got Savathun from the Final Witch Queen campaign mission. I don't know how many encounters are added in total, as I have been at work most of the week, so I can't really say for certain how many there are, but what I do know is that the bosses are in rotation daily, with each daily reset, so it does bring some variety to every day, especially for week 1, because going into the next day, you have no idea what challenges you could potentially be fighting, and it's always just nice to jump into the next thing, not knowing what or who you're going to be fighting until you actually get there. Now that's all the good stuff, and I'm quite satisfied with this event, how it is so far, but for the downside, it is the same 5 bosses with no rotation, at least for each day. It would have been nice to see about 20 bosses or so that rotate randomly with each activity you start. So the first tier might be Savathun, and you would absolutely melt her instantly, and then the last tier might be that Empire Hunt one, so that would be a nice variety in what you're facing at what difficulty, if that makes sense, and that would really shake things up on its own, even if it was just the same 5 bosses but in a random order. You also can't go beyond 5 bosses. What I would have liked to see is a challenge mode where there's infinite waves or loops that keep getting harder to the point that it's too hard. Harder than a GM and contest mode combined. This would be just to see how far you can push your builds and be massively rewarded for that progress. That would have been nice to see, but obviously with it being more focused around free to play for everyone, it would have needed its own separate mode. And lastly, the rewards and trying to target focus a specific reward absolutely sucks. It just doesn't feel that rewarding in my opinion. You get 1 drop from a normal clear of about 10 minutes or so, or a few extra drops if you do expert, which honestly doesn't take that much longer. What I would have liked to see is some sort of attunement to help with drop rates, or an attunement to guarantee a specific perk in 1 slot. That would have been quite nice, or just up the amount of rewards altogether. Despite all the good and bad, those are my thoughts and why I feel mostly positive but mixed about the game mode. The Guardian Games itself, I'd rather have this than have to go into Nightfalls and repeat the same Nightfall over and over like we did with previous years, but you could argue that we're basically doing that anyway now, but with Rushdown's 5 bosses over and over each day. If I had to choose between Guardian Games, Nightfalls and Rushdown, it would honestly be Rushdown, so I think they've done a pretty good job, at least a great start, to making some event changes. It's like Festival of the Lost, which I can argue the opposite. When Haunted Sectors first came out, I honestly hated them and I would have rather they kept the Haunted Forest, but for Guardian Games, I'm happy with this change and it's great, and I really hope that Bungie takes this feedback from players into consideration moving forward and make more changes like this for events to come in the future, like Solstice, Festival of the Lost, The Dawning, and any more new and returning events to come. Guys, that's my opinion on the new Rushdown event. Let me know what you guys think down below, and I'll catch you later.